Hi everyone, welcome to another Port Jackson Securities webinar. I am your webinar host Caitlin Chung, and today we are joined by special guest Stefano Marani, the CEO and MD of Renergen. Thank you so much for joining us today, Stefano.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So today Stefano will go through a presentation and then afterwards we will finish off with our live Q&A. Feel free to send through questions through the chat function or the question function whilst Stefano is presenting, and we will get through them after he's done. Okay, Stefano, would you like to start us off?
Yeah, perfect. And so the presentation should be available for all to download, if not through this, then through our website. I'm going to try and get through the presentation within 20-25 minutes, and then we can keep it open and interactive. I find that's much more productive.
Mm-hmm.
Will you let me know when you can see it being shared?
Yeah.
Is it displaying? Okay, perfect. Cool. Alrighty. And I'm hoping that this format works simply because this is PowerPoint on my iPad. So I hope the graphics have been changed.
Yeah, it looks good. Okay,
perfect, great. All right, so at a very high level, the key takeaways on the company. We're an emerging LNG and helium producer out of South Africa. Both experiencing some phenomenal tailwinds right now. Helium is a very strategic commodity. At one stage, it was the second most critical element to United States national security. It's used in pretty much everything that we do in modern life, from your cell phone to laptops to things as complicated as rockets and satellites. If you try to buy a new car recently and you either couldn't get the car that you wanted, or it came with reduced functionality, we all know that the issue over there is semiconductors. The reason that there's an issue with semiconductors is because the semiconductor manufacturers are having an issue obtaining their helium. So it's like all roads lead to helium at the moment. It's a very high growth commodity, and it's an extremely short supply, exacerbated now by the conflict in Russia and Ukraine. United States was the primary supplier. At one stage, they produced about 80% of the world's helium. That had dropped to about 50%. With the current shutdowns, the US is probably only supplying about 30 to 35% of the world helium. In time, the balance of helium production will switch over to Russia and to Qatar. And obviously, from a geopolitical perspective, this is a bit more of a geopolitical global issue, and so we believe that bringing a producer on in a neutral country like South Africa is of strategic importance. It's a very, very rare gas. Concentrations are typically between 0.01%, like you find in the gas in Qatar. It's about 0.1% in Russia. You've got some fields that boast as high as 0.5%. Our average is about 3.4%, and we've got wells that clock all the way up to about 12%, which makes it without doubt the highest concentration of helium on the planet right now. Sorry, my dog's going crazy. Bear with me 1 second. I'm just going to close the door. Fortunately, my kids are at school, so you won't see them running into the picture. Now, South Africa is strategically located for many, many reasons. We all know its history. It was founded as a trading post, thanks to the Cape of Good Hope. So it boasts the ability to reach pretty much all four corners of the world in the shortest shipping time. It's really the only port that you can reach literally all four corners of the globe in under about 33 days worth of shipping, which is critically important because right now, as it stands, Qatar's helium leaves Qatar and it arrives in Shanghai on day 44, if everything goes well. And this is particularly important because helium can only transport for 45 days before you have to start venting payload. That means that the less time that it spends on the water, the more valuable your cargo on the other end, because every single day that container is on a ship, 1% of the original amount that went into the container converts from liquid to gas. Liquid is the valuable stuff. Gas is much, much less valuable. And so all of the prices that you see are liquid, they're not gas prices. So the important thing over here is that the quicker that you get it to port, the more liquid you have in the tank and the more valuable your cargo on the other side is. Now, we don't take any risk because we sell X works. But for your customers inevitably want to buy helium from whoever can ship it to them in the shortest amount of time. And that's where South Africa is so strategically important. Also, from an LNG perspective, it's strategically important because we have a gargantuan energy crisis on this side. And this is the country's first and only onshore petroleum production right in operation, and will be producing the country's first LNG. All right, so in terms of the highlights, it's a world-class helium reserve. It's the only onshore petroleum production right, and our customers using the LNG locally have the ability to significantly reduce their carbon footprint. To put this in perspective, the South African economy is regarded as around the 8th worst polluter on the planet when you do it on the basis of carbon dioxide per dollar of GDP generated. So our economy is particularly filthy because we're so dependent on really low-grade coal and aging infrastructure and power plants that should have been mothballed in some cases as many as 3 decades ago. So we've got failing infrastructure, and gas really is a transition fuel in this case. And as a result, gas in South Africa enjoys a significant premium to most places in the world. We're selling gas typically somewhere between 16 and 19 US dollars per gigajoule. And that's when times are good. So yeah, when Henry Hub is down at around $2 or $3 per gigajoule. We see ourselves as a clean energy company, and that really has a lot to do with the nature of the gas itself, and I will touch on that because the geological story is absolutely phenomenal. So in terms of the board, myself and Nick are the 2 founding members of the company. We bought the asset in 2012, and since then with backing by a high net worth individual here in South Africa, and since then we've been developing the project. We listed it in 2015 on the JSE and then 2019 on the ASX. We recently had Brian Harvey join us as the CFO. Started off his career as a mechanical engineer in the oil and gas space, designing oil wellheads, which is really great. It means that he comes from that specific kind of background. And then he became a CA, and he's got experience on dual listed companies. So he brings a wealth of experience to the team. Dr. David King, our chairman, should be well known to Australians, given his involvement in many oil and gas plays out in that neck of the woods, including Beach Petroleum, amongst a few others, which he was intimately involved with the establishment and listing and commercialization of these companies. Shareholding, this is a little bit out of date, especially after the recent announcements. I apologize for the format. It's come out really, really badly in this application that I'm using over here. Okay, so in essence, at the time of the drafting of this, we had 123.8 million shares in issue. At the moment, that's 129.6 million. And that was on the back of the Ivanhoe transaction, which we recently announced. Share price as of yesterday is about $3.90. That puts our market capitalization somewhere in the region of about 505, I think, million Aussie dollars, or about 5.6 billion rand. In terms of debt, we've got $40 million on the balance sheet, which was a loan from the United States government to build the first plant. There is an interest-free subordinated loan of 50 million rand, which was vendor financing, and that's only payable out of distributable profits. And then there's an IDC loan, which is for midstream and downstream equipment for fuel dispensers and things of the like. Renergen owns Tetra 4, 100% at this stage, and then Tetra 4 has the production right in Virginia, and then a host of exploration rights. You can see from the shareholding, the JSE and the ASX are quite curious. On the JSE, the majority of our shareholders are institution, from entities such as the government pension fund, very large hedge funds like Mazi Asset Management, Sanlam, who's the biggest fund in Africa, 361 Visio. So many big blue chip institutions on the side in South Africa. In Australia, it is predominantly retail, with the exception of one large shareholder being Notable Pioneer. And then obviously the Otto family. The Otto family were that was the young entrepreneur that funded Nick and I on the initial acquisition. We have 4 key pillars in the business. Power generation. Now, power generation is not online yet. Power generation will come in our phase 2 project. So that is going to be a project for further down the track. But eventually, when the phase 2 project comes online in 2025, we will see generation of around 60 megawatts of gas to power coming into operation. And that power, as we announced in the Ivanhoe transaction, it looks like that's already been earmarked for Ivanhoe. In terms of the second pillar, it's industrial users. Now, given South Africa's energy mix and South Africa's distinct lack of energy, LPG is used really extensively over here. Now, for those of you that don't know the technical difference between LPG and LNG, LNG is liquefied natural gas. It's stored at minus 162 degrees Celsius, and it's comprised of predominantly methane, which is only 1 carbon per molecule. LPG is a concoction of condensates. In some places it's cleaner, in other places it's dirtier. So for instance, if you were buying LPG in Europe, it would predominantly be propane, or 3 carbons per molecule. Unfortunately, in South Africa, we get the dodgy scraps. And so LPG over here is predominantly butane, which is truly a rubbish gas to burn. And so as a result, LPG over here tends to be quite dirty. We are targeting LPG customers in the industrial space, and the reason that we're doing this is because it's extremely low-hanging fruit, because bizarrely enough, LPG is for some reason more expensive than diesel in South Africa. Haven't figured it out yet, but there you go. So we are targeting those customers because that's particularly low-hanging fruit, and those are very large industrial customers. We've already announced 2 contracts in the form of Consol Glass. Consol Glass, just by way of background for the non-South Africans on this call, it is a huge glass manufacturer that manufactures most of the glass for the world's largest brewing company, Anheuser-Busch, which is also a proudly South African company with American roots. We've also announced a transaction with Italtal, the largest manufacturer of ceramics on the African continent. So 2 big blue chip customers over there for our LNG for phase 1, and we're in discussions with them on phase 2. The third pillar is a very interesting one, and this is liquid fuel substitution. Now, this has an extremely large number of benefits. You've got a situation where you can take a completely normal standard diesel truck and you can pump LNG through the engine. Well, first you have to gasify it, but you can put LNG through the engine mixed with the diesel. And the result is that you've got a 34% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions in the truck. You've got an increase in torque by about 15%. So what ends up happening is that you detune the engine, and because you detune the engine so that it runs at the original OEM characteristics and specifications, it means that your overall fuel consumption drops by 10%. So we've been trialing this now in South Africa for the better part of about 7 years. And we've noticed not only significant emissions reductions, but we've noticed a significant drop in the running costs of these trucks by as much as 26 to 28% of the fuel cost. Now, if you had to just think about this for 1 second, I don't know what the logistics markets looks like in Australia. I can't talk to it, but I can talk to the South African logistics market, which is where our customer base is. For every truck that you have on the road, and we've got the 11th largest fleet of trucks on the planet, and this is thanks to our failing railway infrastructure. So we've got 377,000 heavy trucks, and for us, a heavy truck is a 6x4 carting a 51-ton combination payload. So they're big beasts. One of these trucks will consume an inordinate amount of fuel. It does about 14 hours worth of driving a day because the distances are quite large. And they're very heavy on the roads, they're very heavy on fuel, and they're massive polluters. If you look at the income statement from one of these trucks, it'll generate 100 units of revenue. Of those 100 units of revenue, about 60 units will go into diesel. That leaves you with 15 units going towards the cost of ownership of the truck. So here we're talking about refinance payments, driver insurance, maintenance, wear and tear, tires. You've got another 20 that typically goes to the overhead of the company. It leaves you in a situation where a trucking company has about 5 out of the 100 as profit before tax. Now, even if you were to only save 10% of your fuel cost, not the 28% that we've seen, just 10%, you're sitting in a situation where your 60 goes down to 54 and your 5 profit before tax goes to 11. So you've more than doubled your truck's EBITDA for every 10% that you save. And so this is a business case that can't be ignored. Plus, you actually get the benefits to be able to brag that your company's gone green. And so this is something that we work with Total. We're looking at filling stations all the way across the country when phase 2 is up and running. So we will have, and I'll show you a little bit later in the presentation, we'll have filling stations along all of the major routes all the way throughout the country. Our business model is not deliveries in city. Our business model is between the major cities. That's where we really see the benefits of gas. And that's also the part of the logistics chain where EVs will just never, ever be able to penetrate the market. You're never, ever going to get an EV truck doing Johannesburg to Cape Town towing 51 tons. It's just physically not possible. You would have to have about 6 tons of lithium on your truck. So that's never going to work. The final pillar that we have is helium, and this is obviously the exciting part. Our phase 1 helium, and I'll talk to phase 1 and phase 2 in a second, but the phase 1 has already been contracted. That's gone. The plant comes online in the next few weeks, and that production will be satisfying 100% of the South African market, and then the balance will be exported. Our phase 2 production, we've got 65% already pre-contracted in long-term take-or-pay agreements, and we've left 35% of the balance for the spot markets and for the token offering. Again, points I will touch on a little bit later. So here, maybe this didn't come out nicely at all. Can you see over there?
Yeah, it looks really good for me.
Okay, cool. All right, so we've got phase 1 and phase 2. Phase 1 is coming online in a very, very short space of time, and the helium capacity for that is about 350 kilograms per day. 350 kilograms per day is relatively small. It's about 1.5 times South Africa's consumption. It's probably about 70% of Australia's consumption. But in terms of global consumption of helium is about 80 tons per day. The majority of it going to the United States, then Europe, and then China, and then Japan in 4th place. LNG capacity, the nameplate capacity from the first phase is about 2,700 gigajoules per day. We won't be generating any power, and the cost to build it was around $60 million US. Phase 2, this will be a significant ramp up. That'll be 5 tons per day, or between 7 and 8% of the entire global consumption of helium. So it'll be a big plant. LNG capacity of about 24,000 gigajoules per day with an associated bolt-on 60 megawatts of power. And the cost to build that project is going to be somewhere in the region of about 900 million US. That will be first gas to plant coming on towards the back end of 24 in full-scale operation during the course of 2025. Now, we recently announced in September of last year an update in our reserve statements, and very pleased to say we had some substantial increases in the gas discoveries that we'd made. So on the methane side, we came in with 2P numbers of around 407 billion cubic feet. Now, this is not big by any stretch of the imagination when you compare it to global gas projects. 0.4 TCF is very modest. But you need to take it in the context of this is South Africa's first and only onshore petroleum production right. It is South Africa's first and only commercially available LNG. We cannot import LNG over here. We don't have ports that are deep enough. That means that we have to dredge the ports. And from an environmental perspective, there are very few people that are willing to allow the dredging of the ports, especially considering that there are some environmentally sensitive areas near these ports. So importing LNG is a big no-no. The second part of that equation is that the legislation and the framework around the importation of LNG forces you to gasify it before it touches land in South Africa. I've got no idea why anyone decided to put that as a rule in the rule book, but that is what it is. So that means that it can only be transported through pipeline, and it just so happens that all of our customers happen to be outside of the pipeline because there's only one destination point on the pipeline, and that's Johannesburg. So we've got the rest of the country to ourselves. So 407 BCF in that context, with a price of between 16 and 19 US dollars per gigajoule, is quite a healthy little project. The methane numbers, now these are gargantuan, and I need to qualify this. What the numbers that you see over here are our proven reserves. There must be, I don't know, somewhere between 5 and 10 listed companies, I've lost track, that are claiming to be dabbling in helium. You can look through all of their investment theses. Not one of them has proven reserves. Not one of them has contingent reserves. They all have prospectives. If we had to include our prospective reserves, just to put the numbers in context, so we're comparing apples and apples, our prospective reserves at a 3U level would be the same as the whole of the United States combined with the whole of Canada, combined with the whole of Australia, combined with the whole of Poland, and you would still have space left over. That is how big our prospective resources are. So it's completely meaningless putting those numbers in. That's if you wanted to compare a like for like. If you want to compare proven reserves, we're the only ones with proven reserves. And that's because we drilled, we've got wells, we're going into production. Our 2P is 13.6 BCF. 13.6 BCF equates to probably around 2.5 years of entire global consumption. Now, yeah, at 5 to 8% of world's consumption, which is what we're targeting, we've got an extremely long life of mine just at the 2P level. Incidentally, if anyone wanted a quick back of the matchbox calculation as to what the value of 1 BCF of helium is on surface, it is probably somewhere in the region currently at refinery gate. It's worth about $350 million at the refinery gate on surface per BCF. You take that to the customer level, and I mean we've heard pricing, staggering pricing, somewhere in the region of 8 to 10 times that when it gets to the end customer. So it's worth a lot. Yeah, this is just a simple illustration in terms of what the rand price per share and what the dollar price per share is, assuming however many shares we issue in the process of the capital raise for phase 2. But you can see over there, there's an interesting range from 7 Aussie dollars on the low side all the way up to $40 on the high side. Now this is where it starts to get really fun. Why is the gas there in the first place? And it is a complete cosmological and geological freak accident. And can you see the third bullet point over there? It just says gas is produced as a byproduct of radioactive decay. Can you see anything below that or not?
There's just a white space over it.
I thought so. Okay, so what I'd urge everyone to do is just to download the latest version of the presentation and go through it in your own time. But the point on this slide is that you had the situation on Earth 3.8 billion years ago. All of the continents were joined together in one superstructure called Pangaea. Now we know that all elements above iron on the periodic table, so iron is number 26. 27 and onwards, all of those elements came to Earth from asteroids, and they had to have come from asteroids because our sun is just too puny to fuse anything above iron. And so the majority of the planets in our solar system are all made up of the first 26 elements, just as is Earth. And Earth got lucky because of a thing known as the Great Bombardment. So 3.8 billion years ago, there was a meteor shower. These meteors were spat out by a supernova in another galaxy, which became a black hole, and those asteroids which were ejected from the supernova had enough energy to fuse, and that's why we get to mine what we mine. The That payload was delivered predominantly in the southern part of Africa, pretty much in a straight line between Congo and the Free State in South Africa. That meant that your main beneficiaries of this incredibly valuable payload were South Africa, some parts in Angola, Botswana, Zambia, and the Congo, and that's why mining in this part of the world is truly exceptional. Over time, you had soil erosion from rain, then moved a lot of these minerals, and this is why Western Australia is a very interesting mining jurisdiction, because they got the runoff from a lot of the soil erosion from following the bombardment. You had some stray meteors here and there, some in Canada, some in Russia, but by and large, the vast majority of the minerals on Earth were moved around as a result of soil erosion. South Africa would have lost all of its mineralogy when the continents broke up had it not been for a second event. And the second event was the Vredefort asteroid. The Vredefort asteroid struck about 2 billion years ago, and you can see that pink blob in the middle. That's the epicenter of the crater. It's the largest asteroid ever to have hit the planet. It created a crater 330 kilometers in diameter, about 10 kilometers deep, and you can see our production right in red in the southwestern corner over there. We've got 187,000 hectares on the rim, and the key point over here is that you need to be on the rim if you're going to have any gas or helium. Now, where our production right is, we were lucky that during the bombardment there was a delivery of uraninite, so very, very high concentrations of uranium at levels of about 10 kilograms per ton in a layer of rock called the Dominion Group, which is 5 kilometers thick, starting 5 kilometers underground. And so you've got this enormously radioactive part of the world with arguably the largest single delivery of uranium ever to have come to planet Earth. Impossible to mine, too deep, too dangerous, too radioactive. That stuff is never ever going to come out the Earth. But it's great for us because it's incredibly deep, and it's been compacted, and the second asteroid created a seal, and the seal was important because that seal is what kept all of the helium in place, the helium that was being created as a byproduct of radioactive decay. So uranium, over a period of 2 billion years, breaks down, it becomes lead, and it releases 8 helium atoms in the process. And so what we're sitting with is that we're sitting with this gargantuan trap of all of this helium, which is why our concentrations are so ridiculous. But then the second part of the story, where the methane comes from, and why I referred to earlier the fact that the methane is considered relatively green. I don't say it's green, I'm saying relatively green. And that's the fact that when this asteroid struck, the second one, the Vredefort asteroid, it struck at a time in Earth's history when stromatolites had just formed. Now, the impact of this asteroid pushed our tectonic plate underwater. The tectonic plate eventually came back up. You had the saltwater lake in the middle of the country full of these stromatolites, and in time these stromatolites needed to evolve to their surroundings. The reason that they did this was because you had sedimentary layers being deposited over them. Life finds a way. If it's not going to get its energy from the sunlight like chlorophyll does, it needs to get its energy from somewhere else, and in this case it evolved to absorb energy from the radioactive decay. They're all just electromagnetic waves after all. And so you had this alpha particle decay from the uranium, which was charging this bacteria, this archaea bacteria. And the bacteria is alive and thriving today after 1.5 billion years of evolution. And it is eating the carbon in the rock, and it is producing methane as a byproduct. The alpha particles from the radioactive decay then go on to form hydrogen, which then ultimately becomes helium. And there you have it. We've got this never-ending source of methane. The helium will deplete. The helium does not regenerate. It takes 2 billion years. But the methane is constantly regenerating. And that's why we've been classified as renewable by the South African government. But the proof is in the pudding, because the first wells were drilled in 1957, and they produce more gas today than they did in 1957. We've never had any decline in any of our wells. It's truly a spectacular little discovery. All right, you can't see the percentages over here because of the technical glitch, but MRIs form about 20% of the world's market. Welding is about 17%, and then there's this category other, 14%. I'll get back to that in a second. And then fiber optics is about 6%, and then electronics, according to this, is 4%. Now the landscape has changed completely, and the reason that the landscape has changed completely is that whilst MRI will continue to grow in its overall consumption, the rate of growth in MRI as a percentage will probably start to decrease. And the reason for this is because rockets need an inordinate amount of helium to take off, but like a stupid amount. To put it in context, consider a petrol station. A petrol station will take a delivery of petrol or diesel. That tanker is about 38,000 liters of fuel. One petrol station will consume that tanker in somewhere between 1 to 3 days. So now just think of every single petrol station in every single town, in every single city, in every single country in the world, and think about how many of those tankers are being consumed per day on the planet. It would be a lot, right? Hundreds of thousands, if not more. Now you compare that to the world helium market, where at the refinery level, it's about an $8 billion a year market. The total number of containers consumed per day is 16. That's it. That's the whole global helium market, is 16 containers a day. Now, every single time one of these big rockets goes into orbit, it uses 2.5 of those 16 containers. Now, I ask you with tears in my eyes, we're going to start launching them every 4 days, and that's just one company. And then there's another company that has its own ambitions to launch between 10 to 20. And then you've got NASA launching, and then you've got the Chinese launching, and you've got the Pakistanis launching. The Australians have just announced that they want to start launching. Everyone wants to launch rockets these days. Where on earth is all that helium going to come from? So that's the first challenge. The second challenge is the semiconductor industry. Obviously, there's a massive push to try and diversify the manufacturing base of semiconductors. We are all aware of the geopolitical situation and that the majority of semiconductors currently come from Taiwan. Now, if you go and establish, as many people have been doing, semiconductor manufacturing operations in, say, Austin in Texas, it's not the case that if you are making 100 chips here, and now you make 50 chips here and 50 chips here, but this was using 1 ton of helium, it doesn't switch to 500 kilos of helium, 500 kilos of helium. It's not proportional to the number of chips that you're making. The autoclave in which the chips are made is sized to a certain size, which means that now you're making 50 over here from 1 ton of helium, and you're making 50 over here from 1 ton of helium. And overnight, boom, you've doubled your helium consumption. So the diversification of the semiconductor industry into manufacturing across multiple jurisdictions has all of a sudden led to an enormous increase in the consumption of helium. So much so that we were aware of one consumer in Texas, probably about 4 weeks ago, who paid $10,000 per 1,000 cubic feet of helium. Whereas about a year ago, that price was about $250. So that gives you an idea of the strain that these current geopolitical events are putting on the helium market. This pricing is completely outdated. It's not even worth talking about this because you wouldn't even be able to see these prices on the new scale. Helium supply demand dynamics. This is the update from this slide, is that we had 3, arguably 4 major events take place recently in the helium market on the supply side. The first was must have been about 8 or 9 weeks ago now, the BLM, the Strategic Reserve in the United States in Amarillo in Texas. This is a reserve that was built by the United States government just after World War I. The Americans were stockpiling helium, and then they passed a piece of legislation called the Helium Stewardship Act shortly after the end of the Cold War. The reason that the reserve was built in the first place was all for military purposes. It was for lifting balloons for bombers before airplanes really took off, pardon the bad pun. And then in the Manhattan Project, they realized that you couldn't actually make nukes and you can't run nuclear power stations without helium. And so as a result, they really put a lot of helium down into the helium reserve. They started auctioning it off under the Helium Stewardship Act, and lo and behold, the MRI was then invented, and that was the beginning of the end for the BLM, which ran out of gas in 2018. They were going to produce the last bit of gas left underground. They were producing about 15% of the world's helium as recently as January of this year. And then that 80-year plant in Amarillo suffered a catastrophic failure, with both compressors going down. The sudden shutdown led to a collapse of the sandstone underground. That sandstone collapse underground dropped the pressure. And now, for many legal reasons, the pressure is below 600 psi. And so as a result, any helium that's left in there now actually belongs to the Secretary of Defense, which means that the BLM is now no longer good to man or beast, other than the Secretary of Defense. So that was the first problem. Literally 2 days later, the massive Russian project in Amur, which was going to supply about 25% of the world's helium and expected to be in full production by September this year, exploded, and there is now an enormous hole in the ground. There is literally a very, very, very big hole in the ground. So that is gone. Linde announced a couple of days ago that they were pulling their staff out, which means that any aspirations of trying to repair that or the other plants that they have are slim to none. So Amur isn't going to be coming online probably for the next 5 to 10 years, if at all. That was within 3 days of each other, and then you had the semiconductor index PHLX on NASDAQ crash 10% because the semiconductor manufacturers didn't get their helium allocations. And then lo and behold, there was a letter by Biden to the Qataris to say, listen, you've got a plant that you've already built, you need to turn it online now to get LNG into Europe. That was meant to come online in March this year. And Qatari Gas then responded formally to Biden in the press saying their plant will not come online until after calendar year 2025. So that was the third in the trifecta of things that really, really destroyed the supply side. But then you've got this truly unexpected consequence of the conflict. And that was the fact that Algeria, who's also a major supplier, shut their helium production facility down because Europe needed the LNG. And so they bypassed the liquefiers to send the gas directly into the pipeline to Southern Europe. And so as a result, Algeria is not producing its full capacity of helium either. So right now, supply is down to about 40%, and we're not sure when it's going to recover from that. On the demand side, obviously, we're aware semiconductors and rockets are pushing prices through the roof. They need more. Now, rockets will always launch. There is no getting around that fact. SpaceX issued some data on their website saying that they could do 1 kilogram into space for around $200. About 70 cents of that is helium. So whether they're paying 70 cents for their helium, or they're paying $1.40, or they're paying $2.10 for their helium, I don't think it really makes a difference when NASA's launching at $115,000 a kilo. Space exploration will get its helium. Semiconductors will get their helium. It's the rest of the industries that are going to suffer massively. So that's welding, underwater breathing, etc. This is outdated. No point in going through this. The supply-demand curves, no one really knows what the new picture looks like. Yeah, we're waiting for the analysts to try and piece all of this current mess together. What we've done as a business, because tokenization and blockchain is quite topical, we've created our own blockchain, and we have begun to pre-sell up to 100,000 MCF or 100 million cubic feet of helium from our phase 2 plant, and we've done this through a blockchain model. We've done it through a third party, a company by the name of Argonon, and these tokens are currently being sold at a price of around, well, over here we say 270. That's because that's what Argonon is paying us, and then Argonon is on selling it at $275 per MCF. This is obviously an incredibly cheap price, especially when you take into consideration that at the moment the semiconductor industry is paying north of $3,500 per MCF. And so we believe that this is a particularly innovative way for us to issue non-dilutive capital as a company by pre-selling the commodity at a favorable price, and for investors to be able to actually trade in the underlying helium. And through having people trade underlying helium through the tokenization market, we'll be able to get a visible underlying spot price of what helium looks like. And so as a result, it'll also help analysts to be able to value not only us, but all helium companies by virtue of the fact that you've actually got a physical tradable commodity. And these tokens, you will be able to then bring them to the plant. We will burn the tokens and we'll give you the equivalent amount of helium when the plant is operational. So we think that's a pretty innovative little product. South African gas market, I've been through this. I'm probably going to skip through to, this just gives you an idea of what a typical forecourt looks like. We're working with Total for a couple of their filling stations. These are the main routes when phase 2 is up and running. You'll see that we will have joined Joburg, Bloemfontein, Cape Town, PE, East London, and Durban through all of the routes. Now, to put our field into context, our field is at that little fork in the road between Johannesburg and Bloemfontein and the N5. That's where our field is. So we're quite strategically located in the main industrial complex of South Africa. This is just a little bit on the dual fuel. You can see this on the presentation. Here's one other last little interesting point, is that from a carbon footprint perspective, you need to consider what the carbon footprint is on your helium. Now, for 1 ton of helium, the associated carbon footprint for a ton of helium from Qatar is 29,288 tons of CO2. By contrast, 1 ton of our helium is only 469 tons. So whilst the world hasn't even gotten to the point of talking about green helium, the fact of the matter is that because of our high concentration, we're sitting in a position where we've got significantly lower CO2 emissions than pretty much any other producers out there. Last slide I will leave you with, and then I will close the presentation. Our proven reserves, the P's, are contained in that yellow block in the middle, which is 14% of the field. The contingents are north-south, the prospectives are west and east. Our phase 2 is only about 60 to 65% of our 2P numbers, which basically gives you a feel for just how much is left in the tank for this little patch of dirt that we have in South Africa. It is an enormous reserve. So I will end the presentation there. I will stop sharing when I figure out how to do that, and then very happy to go into Q&A.
Thank you so much, Stefano. I think you should be a button that just says stop screen sharing.
Cool. There we go.
Yeah, sorry about that. I dropped out for a second. I lost internet. But it is so amazing, the reserves that you guys have, and what you guys have done over the past few years. It's so exciting with phase 2 coming along. We have quite a few questions, so we'll get into it. For those who are new to the company, would you mind just expanding more on what Tetra 4 exactly is?
Tetra 4 is 100% held subsidiary to Renergen. Renergen is the listed holdco, and then Tetra 4 is the company that owns the petroleum production right in South Africa. It's the domestic local legal entity that holds 100% of the production right in South Africa, and that is the subject matter of our recent announcement, where we've entered into an agreement to sell 10% of Tetra 4 to the Central Energy Fund in South Africa at a price tag of about 91 million Aussie dollars.
Okay. And would you be able to tell me more about your partnership with Ivanhoe Mining, please?
Yes, of course. So Ivanhoe is obviously very successful mining house. They mine critical minerals in some really interesting places, but lots here in our backyard. So places in the Congo, parts of South Africa. In South Africa, they've established Ivanplats, which is in the process of constructing the world's largest platinum mine. And that's relatively close to where we are. And so the intention over here is a strategic tie-up between the two companies, because they're going to need an inordinate amount of power, and their shareholders want to ensure that they have the lowest carbon footprint possible. Now, there are many reasons why solar and wind won't work for them, or at least not entirely. And so gas is the next best alternative. And so it made sense for a tie-up between the two companies, in the sense that they're making the investment to help develop us. In return, we're going to supply them with all of the power that they need for their project in order to bring their project online. And then obviously, I think the two companies have a lot of alignment in terms of both of us mining strategically important critical commodities.
Okay, thank you for that. We have so many questions coming in. Someone wants to know, are there any plans to supply helium to SpaceX program in the future?
I may not comment on anything related to the defense industry. That is just a no-no.
Okay. Are there any material execution risks remaining on phase 1?
There are, no, not really. Now we're just going through the motions. I mean, yeah, the plant is here. We obviously suffered some major delays as a result of COVID. And then following COVID, there were some very large delays that came in as a result of the shipping crisis. So unfortunately, on the construction side, every single headwind that you could imagine we faced. But Nick and his team did an amazing job, an honestly amazing job under the circumstances to keep the project on track. And so, yeah, I mean, right now we're just going through the motions, and the whole team from WSCE is out here. They've been out here a few months. They'll be here a few months more. And yeah, we're just systematically making sure that all of the pieces are tied in together before we start commissioning.
With phase 1, what is the time frame to go to steady state production from commissioning in April?
So from commissioning, there are a few weeks, and then you've got the tanks nearly full within a few weeks of that. So that's on the plant side. Then on the pipeline and the drilling side, a little bit more work to be done over there. So we'll start at 50% capacity. You never want to turn a plant on at 100% capacity. So we're giving ourselves 6 months to take it from 50% capacity all the way up to 100% capacity.
Okay. When will helium first start to come online for phase?
Oh, you broke up. I'm not sure if that's
phase
me.
Approach or phase in approach or capacity from day 1?
I'm going to have to ask you to repeat the question, simply because I'm not sure if it was on my side or your side, but I didn't hear the question.
Sorry about. Yep, it was, when will helium first start to come online from phase 2? Will it be a phased in approach or capacity from day 1?
So phase 2, LNG and helium de facto come out at the exact same time. You can't do one before the other. Phase 2 will start to come online in 2025. It'll be phased in. We need to get the exact timing right, but we'd anticipate that it'll start at about 50% capacity on both the LNG and the helium.
Many questions. This is great. Is there helium-3 in the helium mine? Sorry.
Someone's done their research. No, so yes, helium-3 is wildly exciting. Helium-3 is an enormously interesting little molecule, and something that if we had a lot of, I probably would be dead by now. So I'm quite glad we don't have it. Helium-3 is worth about $14 million a kilogram. It is not found naturally on Earth. It's 1 × 10⁻12 in normal helium concentrations. Whilst we do enjoy elevated amounts of helium-3 in our gas, don't think that I have not been down that road, because of the unique geological setting that we have, and that's discussion for much, much longer. We do not have enough that is commercially extractable. And in fact, you will not find anywhere on planet Earth that has it in commercially extractable volumes, because it needs to have a direct channel from the mantle in the Earth in order for you to find helium-3 in extractable volumes. So no, we don't have it. No one else has it. It's made in a laboratory, and there's some really poor bastard out there that has to wear a hazmat suit, and he goes around to all of the nuclear warheads, and he has to bleed the helium-3 out of the nipples on the nuclear warheads, and that is a terrible, terrible job. And in 7 decades, this guy has managed to amass a total of 26 kilograms of the stuff. You only find it on the moon, that's it, or in nuclear warheads.
Can you hear me, Stefano?
I can hear you.
Okay, I can't see you anymore.
Okay, I can't see you either.
So someone wants to know, with further investment, is there any chance phase 2 could come online before 2025?
No, the timeline to manufacture these plants is the timeline. There's no amount of money on the world that's going to bring these things online faster. It's just unfortunate. Where we have a massive tailwind is that of all of the helium facilities in the world right now, we're the most advanced. So aside from our phase 1 project, our phase 2 project is probably the most likely to be the next major project to come online.
Right. Okay.
That hasn't been built yet.
Does Tetra 4 include Evander?
Yes, it does. It does. So the Evander production, the Evander exploration rights are about 120 kilometers away from Johannesburg. Yeah, there's about 55,000 hectares over there. Not as exciting as the Virginia gas project, whilst they have helium of concentrations of between 0.5 and 0.9%, which I guess I'm being spoiled because I think anyone else would chew their arm off for that. It's not the Virginia gas project, but it's still cute. It's still interesting. It's close to Johannesburg, and there's a lot of gas out there.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we're going to take a few more questions, then we'll end. How is debt funding going for phase 2?
Well, the one thing that I will tell you is that raising the capital for phase 2 has been significantly easier than it was for phase 1. That much I will tell you, even though phase 1 was only R1 billion and this is like 14 billion. Yeah, phase 2 has been significantly easier to raise the capital.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and then I'm going to ask one more. I saw that you guys work with a US company called Argonon, where you guys actually issue tokens to allow trading of helium on the crypto exchange. Would you guys ever consider issuing your own crypto?
No, we'd be delisted from the ASX and the JSE in less than 12 hours. There is no place we're going to issue our own crypto. Okay. We're issuing helium to Argonon, and Argonon will issue the tokens on their side, and we will keep it all nice and clean and hunky-dory.
Yep. Okay, well, thank you so much, Stefano, and thank you everyone for submitting questions. I'm sorry we couldn't get through all questions, but I will try and compile them and maybe send them to Stefano, and if Stefano has time, he can send me an email and I'll send it out to all you guys. But thank you so much for your presentation. It was really, really great. Sorry that my internet dropped out a bit, but yeah, thank you, and thank you for meeting us so early over there.
Absolute pleasure. Really enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Have a good day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.